Did you know that the man who invented lobster Newburg, one of the most glamorous dishes of New York's Gilded Age, was a slave trader at the time when it was a capital offense? Have you ever wondered why your mint julep and daiquiri cocktails carry life and death stories that no one has ever shared with you? Why does history keep replacing the true and extraordinary stories of the people behind our most beloved food and drink with comfortable fictions? And have you ever tasted a recipe that survived wars, coups, slavery, revolutions, and more wars, and arrived on your plate almost completely unchanged? Well, tonight you're going to get those stories and tips and lots more with our guest, whom I'll introduce momentarily. Now, if you're watching this video on the replay, please get into the comments and type the word replay. I'd like to know where you're logging in from, what's in your glass, what's the weather like. And of course, if you're here with us on the live stream, please do the same. I'm Natalie McLean. I teach online food and wine pairing classes, and you've just joined one of the most passionate groups of food and wine lovers who gather every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern to talk with the most interesting people in the world of food and drink. Now, I am live streaming this video for the first time on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, but it's based on a recorded conversation that I had with our guest for my podcast, the Unreserved Wine Talk. I'll be jumping into comments, though, as we watch it live together, so get in there. Let me know, what questions do you still have? What comments or stories are you enjoying? I do want to hear from you. One more thing before I introduce our guest, let me say that 3 of you are going to win a copy of his terrific new book, Acquired Tastes, The Lives and Recipes of 8 Culinary Ambassadors that he co-wrote with his wife and son. All you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know that you'd like to win a copy, and I'll choose 3 people randomly from those who contact me. All right, back to our guest. James Chatto read English at New College, Oxford University, before becoming an actor and musician. He is truly one of Canada's best-known writers on the subject of food and drink, and has written 7 books, including A Kitchen in Corfu, the best-selling A Matter of Taste with Lucy Waverman, and 2 memoirs, The Man Who Ate Toronto, love that title, and The Greek for Love. By the way, I do have to say this, The Greek for Love is one of the best books I've ever read, food related or not. I bought 50 copies of them just to let you know how much I love the book. Gave them as Christmas gifts one year, and it's timeless, so it's still really very much worth reading. As a journalist, James spent decades as Toronto Life's restaurant columnist, senior editor of LCBO's magazine Food and Drink, and editor of Harry magazine. His writing has appeared in dozens of publications in Canada, the US, and the UK. A co-founder of the Canadian Culinary Championship, he is a Chevalier de Confrérie de Chevalier de Tasse de Fromage de France, and a freeman of the Corfu town. He is also puppet maker, of course. And he joins us now from his home in Toronto. Welcome, James. We're so glad you're here with us.
Oh, Natalie, it's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Congratulations on this fabulous new book. I can't wait to dive into it. But first, you are truly one of Canada's most decorated food and wine writers, nominated 3 times for the James Beard Foundation Awards and 3 times by the World Food Media Awards. So you're wow. In fact, I believe the first time we met James might have been at a James Beard Journalism Award dinner or whatever. Do you have any recollection of that evening?
Are you kidding? I remember it very, very well. We were both nominated for awards that night, and there were you at a table right up by the stage, and I was half a mile away at the back. So it was pretty clear that you were going to win and I wasn't. And indeed, that's what happened. So congratulations. It's some time ago now, but
yes,
still a victory.
Absolutely. I think you think they're more organized than they actually are, but however that is. But I remember your comment, which just cracked me up at the time. So they served this meal, and it's hard to, as you know, to serve whatever it was, 500-600 people or however many were there. Dessert had just come out. You came over to visit our table, and you looked at the dessert, which was, I don't know what it was, but you said that looks like a cruise ship buffet dessert, something like that. You said it far more elegantly, and it broke me up.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Always the critic.
And funny. So before that, though, you played Pontius Pilate in the London production of Jesus Christ Superstar and had a hit record on the British Northern Soul charts. Wow, what a background. What does a hit record, though, and a crucifixion have to do with eventually becoming a food or a restaurant critic who really did shape how a generation of Torontonians understood food?
Well, the short answer is absolutely nothing.
Good
I
answer.
gave up. I gave up the theatre and music and acting in my early 20s. I'd always wanted to be a writer and knew that that's what I was probably going to end up doing. And it seemed to be taking up the same kind of energy, so I chose writing. And I really haven't looked back. And also, I just met this gorgeous Canadian woman who said, "Why don't we just go off and have some adventures somewhere else?"
And that would be Wendy, your wife, or was it somebody else?
No, this is Wendy, my
Okay,
wife.
good.
Yeah.
We could always edit that bit out. No, that was Charlotte the brunette. Anyway, so your godfather was the actor Robert Morley, who is also a food critic for Punch, a publication in the UK, and Playboy. What did he teach you? What did you learn from him about either writing or food or whatever?
Uh, when I was a kid, we used to dine out with him a lot. My mother was his great friend, and my brother and I would be there, little people at the table. And we were always amazed at a trick he had where at the dessert trolley would come up, and he'd say, "Oh, I'll have the profiteroles," and they'd laid up this plate with beautiful profiteroles, and then he'd say, "Oh, and a piece of the almond tart too." So he kind of got two desserts for the price of one, which we thought was genius.
Very crafty.
He was a brilliant man. He had a fantastic instinct for restaurants. You could put him down in a city anywhere in the world and he'd find you a fabulous restaurant, even if you've never been there before. Not a grand place, but he had a sort of nose for excellence. And I guess what he taught me when I started to write about food too was really writing about food isn't so much about food as about people. It's about the people who grow the food and cook it and serve it and consume it. And so I kind of always held that in my mind when I was writing about restaurants and things like that it's really the story of people.
It is, and it comes through in your writing very powerfully. So you wrote this book with your family. Now, maybe just give us that high-level in a nutshell. What's this book is about? Your one or two liners that kind of defines it.
Okay, so what this book is about is it is 8 separate, completely sort of autonomous culinary adventure stories, really, about how a recipe went from one culture to another, and the individual person, real life person, who carried it from one culture to another. When we started doing it, my son, who's a historian, and me as a food writer, we wanted to write a culinary history book. But my wife, who is more involved into fiction and storytelling, she said, "Well, we need to have real people in this. We have to make it a biography, not just of the recipe, but of an actual individual who did that transition." So those were the parameters that we set ourselves. And the recipe had to leave one culture where it was definitely from and get deeply embedded into another. It wasn't just that someone opened a Siamese restaurant in New York or something and people tasted a recipe. It had to become part of the new culture too. So that was really the task we set ourselves. And each of our chapters is more or less follows that template.
It's a brilliant concept, good narrative structure. Now, the book's introduction calls it a family project cooked up between 3 writers. You're the food writer, your wife, Wendy, the beautiful blonde, is the storyteller who insisted every chapter be biographical. You've mentioned your son, Joseph, is the historian, and your other child, May Martin, took photos for the book. So what friction did all of these different perspectives create?
Well, it was COVID and we were all kind of thrown together in the same bubble. Not May. May lives in LA, but the 3 of us. And we were, we would get quite possessive about your words, don't you, as a writer? You get a little bit proprietorial. And then we each edited each other's chapters. Each one of us sort of took charge of specific chapters. And we learned how to be much more generous as editors and much less defensive as writers. And I think over the course of writing the book together, we became, we had some confrontations, but they were always resolved peacefully. And I think we became much better at doing this sort of thing as a team.
Wow, that's great. Good family therapy, it sounds like. Work out any issue if you can edit a book together.
Yeah, it takes more than a dinner sometimes. But
yes. Lots of wine. So the book's test kitchen expanded to include family friends as guinea pigs, and the guests were, quote, lulled by a round of Admiral Johnson's daiquiris and were startled by the Renaissance lasagna layered with spiced chicken fat. By the way, what did that taste like?
It's absolutely delicious. I'll tell you the whole recipe if you want, or
Sure,
we can.
sure.
Well, okay. So this is where, how they used to do it in the late 1400s. There were lasagnerie in every town in Italy, and their job was just to make pasta. And you'd go there and you'd buy a sheet of lasagna. And in those days, the idea was it had to be so thin that you could see the shadow of your hand through it.
Wow.
And then they'd cut it into little squares, 3 inches square, and you'd boil that in chicken stock, heavily spiced, with all the good fat and juices from the chicken, because it's made from bones, a real stock. And then you'd fish it out, and you'd put the first layer on the plate, and you'd just brush a little melted chicken fat over it, and then you'd sprinkle on all the spices you had, always pepper, always cinnamon, because Renaissance Italians had this incredible appetite for cinnamon, and also maybe ginger, cubeb, cumin, whatever had come through the Venetian spice route from the Far East, and then tons and tons of grated Parmesan cheese, and then you'd do the next layer, and it'd be up till about 6 or 7 layers. That was the time when forks were just being introduced, but they were only in high society. Most people would just sort of spear a layer with a knife and fold it in and gobble it up. The idea of having that schmaltz, that chicken fat, kind of just, you can do it with olive oil, it would be just the same effect, except it has this beautiful flavour of chicken, right? And when we first tasted it, we didn't know what it was going to be like, but it was absolutely delicious, as long as you keep it hot.
Oh,
And
right. Like McDonald's
Yeah.
getting cold, I imagine.
yeah, it gets a little bit congealed and not so good.
Yes.
But our dinner guests loved that one. That was always a hit.
That sounds beautiful. Was there another memorable guest guinea pig moment?
Well, the chocolate cake, which the first time we cooked that was for a couple who we know well, who are themselves expert at chocolate cake. So I thought, oh, this is easy. They'll love this. And so I did it and I iced it. It was so beautiful. And in my hubris, I didn't even taste it first. So then I sliced it, put it on the plate, and it was dry as chalk. It was awful. We just had a new oven and it was way overcooked. So they never let us forget that. To this day, they have not let us forget it. But gradually we perfected the recipe, and now it's unctuous and gooey and gorgeous, and it's about the chocolatiest cake you've ever had. I think it's one of our hits from the book. So, and they will admit that it's now pretty good. So.
Well, happily ever after then. That's great.
Yeah.
So let's dive in with the first person in your book, Maria Guyomar. Correct me anytime if I'm mispronouncing things here. De Pinha. And the Golden Threads. Okay, so you and Wendy co-wrote this chapter about Maria, who lived from 1664 to 1728. She was half Japanese, half Portuguese, raised in 17th century Siam, now Thailand. She became a French countess, survived torture, escaped by the river at night with her 4-year-old son, was handed back to her persecutors by a French general who had her stolen jewelry in his drawers in his desk, and ended her days as the superintendent of His Majesty's confectionery, commanding a staff of 2,000 women. Wow, I just had to summarize that quickly because it's amazing. But which part of that required the most research to confirm, James?
Well, all of it, really. I mean, it's such an extraordinary story, and she was such a crazy woman. I mean, she was a very devout Christian, and she looked after all sorts of numbers and numbers of orphans. And we found her story in the accounts written by Jesuit missionaries who had been in Siam at that time, and a number of them wrote sort of accounts of the event, because partway through her life there was a huge revolution in Siam, and she was a victim of that. Her husband was killed and she was enslaved, and so we had these accounts of her, and some of them were favourable to her and her husband, and others written by other people were very critical of her husband, but they all seem to agree that Maria was a wonderful and very pious and helpful woman. And after she was given back to the Siamese by this French general, she kind of disappears from history. And then 25 years later, a Scottish sailor shows up in the city in Siam, and he finds her, and she's still a slave. She's working in the kitchens still, where she was condemned, but she's in charge of 2,000 people now, and also in charge of the king's gold plate and his royal robes, and she's a woman of quite some substance in the court. And even though technically still a slave, she has made something of her life, and is still spoken of as a very honourable and helpful person who will always help the underdog. So we kind of fell for this woman.
Yeah. That's
And
an
then
amazing story.
her place in our book is because when she married this Greek guy who was a complete rogue and adventurer, but he became the prime minister of Thailand because he charmed the king to such a degree that she, as his young wife, was elevated to become a lady-in-waiting to the princess of the Siamese court. So she's the first non-Thai woman ever to enter into that court and have that rank. And these young women who were all there, the princess's ladies-in-waiting, they used to show off by cooking. And the Thai women would do the wonderful, you've seen them, these fruit carvings they do that are so exquisite,
Yes.
and make their own desserts. And all Maria had to offer were these strange Portuguese convent desserts that she'd learnt as a little girl from her aunt, who'd been in a nunnery in India. And these are medieval recipes that come from Portuguese convents and were spread through the Portuguese world by nuns who opened convents in other places. And somebody had taught Maria how to do it, and she cooked them for the royal court of Thailand, and they loved them. They were very elegant, very difficult to do. They're beautiful, and most of them are golden coloured because they're made of egg yolk and sugar. And
That's the
an
golden
auspicious,
threads. Yes.
yeah, it's an auspicious colour in Thai culture. It's a royal colour. So the king tried them, and he thought they were fantastic. And so, of course, all his courtiers said, "Oh, yeah, they're fantastic." So they were all taught. Yeah, everybody was taught to make it. And the king said, "You know what? These are so good. I want you to take these recipes out to the dessert market in the city and make them for the people too." And these Portuguese desserts entered into Thai culture, and they're still there to this day. They're not 5 of the 9 auspicious desserts at a Thai wedding, or if your son becomes a priest or something, 9 desserts are served traditionally, and 5 of them we can trace back to Maria as these Portuguese desserts that she introduced to the court.
That's fascinating.
So
yeah.
that's what we thought.
Yeah.
So that was really the start of the book, finding that story.
Absolutely. And so golden threads, known in Thai as phuoc tong,
Feuilleton.
feuilleton, made with duck and chicken egg yolks, strained through cheesecloth, then drizzled in a thin, steady stream through a small-tipped piping bag into boiling syrup perfumed with pandanus leaves and jasmine extract, creating an unbroken thread of egg yolk. And that's gathered with chopsticks into a glistening golden yellow silk. My goodness, what did this taste like?
It tastes delicious, believe it or not. It's surprisingly subtle, because you think it's going to be super sweet, but in fact you drain the syrup off it. And the actual egg thread itself, I guess it tastes like a very fine omelette.
Oh.
It has that same sort of texture of just cooked egg, because it's only in the syrup for about a minute.
Okay.
And then all around it, and in the air around it, is this beautiful fragrance of jasmine and pandanus leaf. The ingredients are only 4. It's so simple. The difficulty is in the technique of stirring it with these chopsticks. I watched it being made by a wonderful Thai cook. She drizzles it 50 times, so the actual thread at the end is incredibly long, and then she just gathers it with her chopsticks into this little hank of thread, like a little bird's nest. It's gorgeous.
That sounds beautiful. And as you say, the golden color represents prosperity and royalty, while that unbroken thread symbolizes longevity, making it especially prized at weddings for a happy marriage. That's beautiful. Now, you tracked down a bakery in Toronto's Little Portugal neighborhood that makes, I guess, is the name Fios de Ovos the name of this dish in Portuguese?
Yes.
Okay.
So we'd found this wonderful Thai woman, Pachmon, who has a dessert restaurant here on Dundas Street in Toronto, and she had made this beautiful Thai version for us, and it was exquisite. But I wanted her to try the Portuguese original because she'd never tried that. And so I finally found a Portuguese dessert that would do this to order. You need a week notice to do it. And it wasn't quite as good as I'd hoped it would be. Uh-huh. They sort of handed over this plastic bag full of syrup with the stuff in it. And I took it to her and I said, try it. What do you think? And we took it out, and they were about an inch long and sort of 4 feet long. So she said, not such a good wedding here. And luckily, and it smelled of sugar and vanilla, and that's really all it tasted of. But because she is a good-hearted person, she found something to praise, which was the texture. She said it was the texture's quite good. So we were
was
sort
nice.
of, oh,
It'd be
phew,
good for a
yes.
Las Vegas wedding, you know.
Yeah, and
when you get
I
to
think
divorce later.
I think to be fair, Portuguese people maybe just to put it on top of a tart or something like that and do something else with it. So
Sure.
maybe just,
Yeah.
I don't know.
So okay, so that's incredible. Why do you think that it's the same egg yolk and boiling syrup recipe, 4 centuries and 10,000 kilometers apart? Why do you think this recipe is still here today when almost nothing else from that world survived?
Well, I think you have two of the most conservative cultures in Portugal and Thailand, and especially in Thai culture. Once it had acquired this sort of reverence, and especially because it was associated with the royalty and with the court, the idea of changing it would be inconceivable. And so in Thailand, recipes were always handed down from mother to daughter, grandmother to granddaughter. No one was writing recipes down in Thailand until about the 1880s, and that was when wealthy women were buried. Their favorite recipes would be put into a little book and buried with them.
Wow.
So it was all word of mouth up till then, and that that helps, as we find in other cultures, especially Southern European ones. Traditional recipes tend to not change too much, because usually it's the grandmother teaching the granddaughter in the house, right?
Sure, sure. That's lovely.
Yeah.
All right, let's go on to candidate number 2,
Okay.
Bono Forza? Sforza?
Yeah, Queen Bona.
Queen Bona. Bona. Sorry, I'm thinking
Yeah.
of the musician.
Right.
So she was one of the most remarkable women of the Renaissance. At 24, she married by proxy Sigismund I. Sigismund I, nearly a 50-year-old king of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania in a political match arranged by the Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor. She traveled to Krakow in 1518 with a retinue of 345 people, including Italian cooks, gardeners, musicians, and artists, and a trousseau that included a large gilded 4-poster marriage bed with 23 embroidered hangings. And you described Bona's wedding dress as costing the equivalent of $200,000 today, made of pure blue satin, embroidered with golden beehives, a symbol of sweetness, wealth, and fecundity. Wow. Okay, so she's quite the woman. Now, tell us about the recipe associated with her.
Yes, well, she, as I said, she traveled to Poland. She brought seeds to be planted. She brought gardeners to do the planting. She brought cooks to cook the vegetables that she grew. She wanted to bring some Italian vegetables into Poland. Maybe some of them would survive the winter, she hoped. So we'll see what happens. But that was the legend that began with her. She was a sort of first real Italian super influencer at the court of Poland. All of the Polish nobility, half of them thought she was great and they wanted to try these wonderful dishes. The other half thought it was ridiculous and that how could you eat salad and an artichoke is just a thistle and how gross, and you need meat and you need alcohol and that's what you need. So there was always the two factions about Queen Bona's court. But her son and her children were raised with these Italian cooking, and her son always liked to have his dinner with her, even after he was married. And so the recipes percolated down into court life. Not everybody could afford to import wheels of Parmigiano Reggiano like she did, or have oranges sent from the Mediterranean to Warsaw in the dead of winter. But some things that she did popularize, amongst them was lasagna, and as we were mentioning earlier,
Yes.
this wonderful Renaissance lasagna. And in her lifetime and in the lifetime of her son at first, people started to eat it. It was fashionable to eat what the Queen ate. So
Sure.
you had these fantastic pasta dishes, and then gradually, as the centuries passed, they became sort of it all changed. French cooking became more fashionable, and then under the communists, all sorts of foreign cooking was seen as bourgeois and was banned. So only one little dish kind of snuck through from the Renaissance times into modern Polish cooking that I've found anyway, and that's called lasagna, and it's really lasagna but turned into a very different kind of dish that starts with some kind of fatty ham and meat and probably a bunch of wild mushrooms and onions and cabbage, and then you finish it off by snipping up little bits of pasta into little postage stamp like squares and stir it all in. And if you imagine a lasagna that's sort of turned upside down, where the meat and the vegetable become the main thing and the pasta is just an afterthought, that's lasagna. And we found a wonderful woman in Gdansk who was able to share her family recipe for that, and it's something that her mother would cook every Christmas Eve, I think. And it all depends. If you can find enough wonderful mushrooms when you go into the woods, then this becomes actually quite a remarkably delicious mushroom dish, really.
Did you have a preference for the original lighter pasta lasagna versus the lasagna?
Yeah, I did. I like the original because I just think it's very elegant and strange. And, the other one is something that one might make anyway, with pasta with mushrooms and ham, and it's great. But the other one was so weird. I loved it.
Yeah, it just sounds remarkable. And all of these recipes are in your book, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's another reason to get this book, Acquired Tastes. Besides this fascinating history, imagine making all of these. And knowing you, James, they would be very well kitchen tested. So just the challenge might be getting some of the ingredients, but they sound remarkable. So I just want to note, too, because Bona is just amazing. Once in Poland, she proved to be a formidable political operator, as you say, buying back leased royal estates, reforming agriculture in Lithuania, founding villages, building roads, quadrupling royal revenue, while managing the dynastic marriages for her 5 surviving children with ruthless pragmatic skill. And despite this, Bona is often reduced to a footnote about teaching Polish people how to eat vegetables. Now, you disprove this popular notion. What does it take to trace a myth back to that? How did you get at that origin story?
Well, yeah, it's so strange. You look up on the internet Queen Bona, and that's the first thing that comes up, is that she arrived to be married to the Polish king as if she had bunches of salad in a suitcase, and she brought all these Italian vegetables. When she was, in fact, this extraordinary woman, there was quite a backlash against her in the 19th century when historians and politicians in Poland decided that she had been a bad influence and had sort of subjugated her husband and her son and softened them up with Italian ways and things like that. And now it's the pendulum swung the other way, and a lot of modern historians, especially people who study gender history, saying, actually, just because she's a woman doesn't mean that she was a bad thing. And she brought the Italian Renaissance to Poland. I'm not saying that Poland was a sort of backwater of medieval culture. It wasn't. Though a lot of Italians thought it was. And one of them wrote Bona a letter saying, thank God, I read this in a Polish book by a well-known Polish scholar, her biography of Queen Bona. And this Italian said, you've taught them manners, you've brought civilization to Poland, you've taught them how to eat vegetables. And that was really what kind of got me started on the whole story. And so eventually I tracked down the actual letter that this guy had written Queen Bona in Latin, and there's no mention of vegetables at all. This had just been mistranslated and put into this biography of Queen Bona, and it kind of spread from there, I think. Or maybe it'd been the other way around. Maybe she'd say, there must be something about vegetables I can put in. But it's not in the letter at all. The letter just says, and you've made them drink less. You've rescued them from drunkenness, I think was the expression that he used. So, it's strange how history can, we hope that history is the transmission of truth and fact, but it can also be the transmission of lies and exaggerations.
Sure. Depends on who writes it, right?
Yeah.
Now, researching your book revealed a number of coincidences that made you feel like you and your family were on the right track. For example, you were at a wine dinner in Toronto, and sitting opposite you was a young Italian wine importer you did not know. What happened?
Well, it was so weird. I mean, he was a very civil and polite young man, and he just arrived in Canada, become a wine agent. And he politely said, well, what do you do? So I said, I'm writing a book. And I said, funny enough, I'm writing a book about an Italian. And she was a queen who married the King of Poland. And he said, you mean Bona Sforza? When I was a boy, I used to see her name every day when I woke up and looked out my window. It was inscribed on the cathedral outside my window.
Oh, wow.
And he turned out to come from this little town that is now a suburb of Bari, but it was called Modugno. And Queen Bona, when she was a young woman, she liked to go hunting. around in the fields around Modugno, and she had stables built there, and she had wells dug there, and she founded a hospital there, and she was the great patron of Modugno her whole life. And when she went to Poland, she took 10 people from Modugno with her. And when she came back from Poland, in her last years, she came back to Bari and resumed being the Duchess of Bari. And she brought a lot of Polish people back with her. And 32 of them settled in the town of Modugno. And the Modugnesi could not understand their Polish names or pronounce them. And so they just called them, the 32, the 32.
Sorry, should have turned that off.
So,
yes.
So ever since then, if you were one of those Polish people, then your last name became Trentadue. And there are many people still called Trentadue in that part of Puglia, and even a Trentadue street in Modugno. And this young man had come from there, and he knew the whole story.
Wow.
And he told me a lot of these extra bits I had no idea about.
Great.
And how many young men in that town are called Sigismund, after Bonner's husband, Sigismund of Poland.
Right.
It's crazy.
Those circles, the world is a small place. That's fantastic. Okay, so up next we have William Trappier and the mint julep. Now, your chapter on this cocktail traces its origin back to William Trappier, a Southern Carolina rice plantation owner farmed by 114 enslaved women, men, and children. While visiting Oxford University as a tourist in 1845, you write, he presented New College, where you attended, with a sum of money whose interest, not that you were attending back in 1845, shouldn't insert things while I'm thinking about them, but anyway. So he presented the college with a sum of money whose interest would pay for the mint juleps to be served to every junior fellow on June 1st every year in perpetuity. He also gave the college his family recipe. I should say, you yourself were a student at New College, Oxford in the mid-70s, and drank mint juleps at the very ceremony Trappier founded. What's the modern recipe for this cocktail, and what does it taste like, James?
Well, I love a mint julep. This is the very classic mint julep made with bourbon. You start by taking some mint leaves and a little bit of sugar and I'd say an ounce of bourbon. You muddle them all in the bottom of a silver julep cup, and then you fill it up with half full of crushed ice. You add another couple of ounces of bourbon, and then you fill it up to the top with the crushed ice, and then you plant a little garden of mint sprigs in the top. Stick a straw in, snip off the straw so it's only about 2 inches above the top. So every time you bend down to get a sip, the first thing you get is mint in your nose, and it's a delightful drink. It tastes much more interesting than it sounds. But the sugar and the mint and the bourbon all muddled up together, and the ice melt is a very important part of it, because it's a long drink. It's a drink to savor and enjoy over a period of time, preferably on a very hot day.
So
and
the ice slowly, the ice slowly dilutes the bourbon, the intensity of the alcohol, spreads out the drink, and the muddling. I've seen this sort of dish and the big pestle thing or whatever. So what are you doing with the leaves? You're just trying to release their oils?
Yeah, exactly. You're not trying to crush them. You're just trying to bruise them and get that mint oil out. Now, some people say at that point you need to take the mint leaves out, and other people say, no, you must leave them in. There's so many arguments about the way a julep should be made. In Kentucky or Virginia is different, but it's a fantastic drink. Now, when you make it in great numbers, like at the Kentucky Derby, over that 2-day race meet, they make 120,000 mint juleps.
My goodness. So
they have a shortcut, which is they make a mint-flavored syrup to start with, and they could just pour in some of that, then some bourbon and some ice, and hand it over. And that's what they do at New College these days too, because in the old days there were 20 undergraduates, but now there are maybe 200, something like that. At the ceremony these days, they're sort of slightly pre-made, but they still do it. It's wonderful. And when I was there, we had the New College Choir, which is one of the most famous choirs in England, and they sang some songs from Porgy and Bess up in the Minstrels Gallery in this medieval dining hall that we have. And what they didn't know, and I found out later, was that Porgy and Bess, the librettist, it was a man called Dubose Hayward, and he was in fact related to William Hayward Trappier on his mother's side. So there's a connection there. There's all these coincidences all over the place.
That's terrific. Oh my goodness. Now, this chapter you include a sidebar quoting historian David Wondrich on the African American bartenders whose expertise has been systematically erased from the history of American cocktails. You're writing a chapter whose central subject, of course, is a white Southern plantation owner who had slaves. How did you decide where to place that background? How did you balance kind of those realities? A very fascinating story with a dark underside, if you will, with the slavery.
Yeah, well, it's very pertinent at the moment in the world, I think, and I asked the question, how are they going to do it in future at New College?
Right.
I believe that the right way of doing it is to give all the information, to say this is what happened. This was tainted money that is sponsoring this event every year. The money was raised on the backs of enslaved men, women, and children. You have three choices. You can either just abolish the whole event, you can pretend it wasn't like that and just not mention Trapier's name or something and just say it's a cocktail party, or you can perhaps tell the story and remind people of the role that the slavery played in our culture. And I favor that way as somebody who believes that the more light you can shed on a subject, the better.
Sure.
And as a historian, I think covering stuff up is not the right way through.
It's going to get out anyway. Most things do.
So tell the truth about it.
Yes, absolutely. Terrific. Onto another cocktail. The daiquiri. Lucius Johnson had an extraordinary surgical career you share with us in the book, specializing in facial reconstruction, serving in naval hospitals across the globe, coordinating disaster relief in the Dominican Republic after a hurricane, building the first naval mobile base hospital at Guantanamo Bay, and rising to the rank of Rear Admiral in the U.S. Navy. Now, he brought the daiquiri cocktail from Cuba to the United States in 1909. Tell us about the cocktail, or the man, or both.
Okay. Well, yeah, he's a remarkable young man, and when I was doing my research into him, I found that he has an archive in a university in North Carolina. So I went down there and I opened the archive up, and there was an autobiography he'd written, unpublished,
Convenient.
Unfinished.
Yes.
Very helpful.
Yeah.
And so he entered the Navy right out of medical school and became an assistant surgeon on a boat, a battleship. And every spring, as they think they used, well, not anymore obviously, but they used to go down to Cuba, to Guantanamo Bay, and do their naval exercises in the springtime. And so he was the junior surgeon on this boat, and they just had the Spanish-American War, had finished only a decade earlier, and some of the young officers decided to go ashore and look at the battlefields where Teddy Roosevelt had charged up the hill at San Juan and won the victory there, and it was all very romantic. And so they landed at this beach called Daiquiri. There was an Spanish-American iron works there, a huge iron mine, and they would ship this iron ore back to the States. And they met one of the mining engineers, who was a man called Stockton Cox. And he said, "Oh, it's such a hot day. Come, we have this hospitality suite here, this little house we call the Casa Grande. You can get in the shade, and I'll make you a drink." And he made them this cocktail that he'd invented a couple of years earlier. And it was the local rum, which was Bacardi, because they used to be made in Cuba,
Okay.
and squeezed lime juice and a little stir of sugar. And he made measured in some ice, and he said, "No, you just have to leave it for a couple of minutes to let the ice begin to melt and let everything get cold." And that was handed to him. That was the original prototype of the daiquiri.
It's very similar to the mint julep. The recipe seems a little similar, but
so many drinks are.
yeah.
They fall under the daisy category of cocktails, which is a citrus and a spirit and a sweetener. I mean, this lime juice, sugar, and rum had been the tipple of the British Navy already for 150 years. Jennings Cox, who was quite a sophisticated man, and back in the States he'd been a club man in New York and Philadelphia, and he knew the value of mixing a cocktail just right and letting it sit for a moment. And he kind of turned this mixture into this fabulous cocktail, the daiquiri, and he just got the balance exactly right. And thank goodness he wrote down the proportions and how to do it. And that piece of paper survives in the University of Miami archives, which we found it there. And so this young sailor was so happy with this that he bought a couple of bottles of the local rum, the Bacardi, and hid them in his sort of duffel bag. And when he got back to Virginia, he went on leave to Washington, D.C., and went into the Army and Navy Club and said, listen, you got to make me this drink I had in Cuba. And he told him how to do it. And he introduced the daiquiri to the rest of the world in that way.
Oh, that is fascinating.
Go ahead. It took off,
Yeah.
and would have done much better if it hadn't been for Prohibition. But there we go.
That can put a dent in your sales anytime. But I love this line in your book. You say it took only decades for Admiral Johnson's pristine daiquiri to be twisted into umpteen slushy travesties. Oh my gosh. And what he named it after the beach rather than Cox, right?
Yes, because Cox had called it a daiquiri.
Cox had called it a daiquiri. Okay.
Yeah, he just thought, but this is where I've made it first. He made it originally by accident because he'd run out of gin, which is what he liked to drink.
Oh, okay.
And he saw that some of the people who worked for him were drinking the local rum, and to make it slightly less aggressive, they were putting sugar and lime juice into it. So that's how he came up with the idea. So that daiquiri was named after the beach.
Great. Okay, let's move on to Lobster Newburgh. Wendy wrote this chapter about Benjamin Jones Jordan Wenberg, a Maine captain in the 1850s. These all sound like characters out of a novel, but they're in your book. He was a slave trader, despite the fact it was a capital offense at the time. He was complicit in the deaths of hundreds of people. Some say he strolled into New York City's Delmonico's Cafe restaurant one day in 1876 and cooked up the lobster Newburgh dish on the spot using the recipe he'd found in the Caribbean. Others credit the restaurant's brilliant chef, as you note. The dish itself is a study in Gilded Age opulence. Tell us about it.
Okay, let's start with the dish. I'll tell you first of all what he did, because he did go in there and he did cook it, and he actually lived at Delmonico's restaurant. They had 9 luxury suites on the 3rd floor above the restaurant, and one of them was his home. And when he wasn't eating downstairs, which was almost every night, he was up there, and he had a chafing dish. So he'd have little spirit lamps under a metal dish, and he'd cook himself dinner. He'd have the food sent up from the kitchens and just experiment and have fun. And he came across this wonderful recipe, and he came down and he showed all his cronies, come here, and he beckoned Charles Delmonico over and said, I've got a great recipe. You could put this on your menu anytime you want. Call it Wenberg. And so you take some cold lobster that was already in the kitchen, ready for a lobster salad, had been cooked. And he fried it in a little butter just for a moment, just to soften it. Added some salt and pepper, a little bit of nutmeg. He glazed the pan with a glass of sherry. Then he beat 2 egg yolks into some heavy cream and poured that in, and let it all heat up, and then finally stirred in a little bit of cayenne pepper. And that's lobster Newburgh, or as it's now called, lobster Wenberg. It's incredibly rich and decadent, and it's absolutely delicious, and it caught on. Everybody loved it and wanted it. And then there was a falling out that he had with Charles Delmonico, and Delmonico changed the name from Wenberg to Newburgh, just changing over the first 3 letters.
Right.
And so lobster Newburgh is what we know it as today. And everybody said, well, we've never seen a menu with lobster Wenberg on it. So it's always been lobster Newburgh. And so Wendy, my wife, the great triumph of this book, she found in a church register in Connecticut that the ladies of the church had put together a little cookbook, and one of them had known Benjamin Wenberg, and she called it Lobster Wenberg. And this was published just a year after he died, and so we take this as proof.
Yes. Oh, that's great.
But nobody remembered who Ben Wenberg was. They said he was a sea captain, and he found this recipe in the Caribbean. He wasn't a sea captain. He never left New York. He was a merchant, and he would sort of hire out. A shipbroker was the name of the profession.
Okay.
And he would, if you wanted to take a ship somewhere and you had a cargo, then he would arrange that. But for most of the 50s and early 60s, he was doing that, and the cargo was enslaved people kidnapped from Africa and sold, coincidentally, often to Cuba, where they became slaves in the sugar plantations there.
Right.
And many times his vessels were caught and taken back to America and put on trial in the court, and invariably the case was dismissed. The judge would say, "There's no evidence here," and he got away scot-free time after time, because it was in everybody's best interest to continue this terrible, terrible thing, because the New York banks were making a fortune of lending money to the South and the cotton and rice plantations down there. And it was, I mean, you think things are corrupt these days. It was just as bad.
Wow, 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 wow. Okay. Now, yeah, that just sounds beautiful, the dish, I mean, and it gives it gives a really a sense of the Gilded Age opulence, and that sort of defining luxury. So it also became a dish that Auguste Escoffier considered worthy of inclusion in his 1902 Le Guide de Culinaire. So it really became an icon kind of dish. And what did you recommend as a wine pairing for the dish?
Well, I looked at some of the old menus from Delmonico's from the 1870s that have come down to us. Not the daily menu, alas, there are very few of those, but for special events they would make these gorgeous hand-painted menus with satin and ribbon and things on them. And there is thank goodness, how polite and how wonderful. They would always list the wines that were served with these dishes. And lobster Newburg is frequently sort of early on in the meal, and so it's often going to be champagne they're having, but it was also, I've seen it with a beautiful Meursault, a rich white Burgundy. So of course we had to try both.
Yes,
Natalie.
Of course, for research. Yes, and maybe a few more times after that.
Well, we did, and what would it be like with this? And the Meursault was great because it's such a rich, wonderful wine, and it was a beautiful complement to the dish. And the champagne had the opposite effect as a contrast. It just cleansed your palate, and it was the dryness and the crispness, and you could go on eating more lobster Newburg if you were drinking champagne with it, we discovered.
Yes. So. You don't satiate out as quickly when you've got a great wine pairing, exactly. As you know, classic. Yeah. All right. How about Rash Bahari Bose and the Curry of Love and Revolution? So just the quick backgrounder, Rash Bahari Rose, a Bengali revolutionary, journalist and cook. In 1912, he masterminded a failed assassination attempt of Lord Harndinge, the Viceroy of India. Rash threw a bomb at Harndinge from a rooftop dressed as a Muslim woman. He then organized the welcome ceremony for Harndinge as he was convalescing, delivered an eloquent speech condemning the attack, and was personally thanked by the Viceroy for his patriotism. Now, the dish he's famous for is Bengali chicken curry, and he sourced free-range chickens whose bones yielded a collagen-rich, thick stock. So tell us about that dish.
Okay, well, I'll just have to go back a little bit to Rash Bahari. After he was not caught for trying to bomb the Viceroy, yes. He then tried to instigate a mutiny in the British Indian Army, and that was a disaster, and he had to flee India, and he got on a ship for Japan, disguised as in an English suit with a copy of the Times under his arm, and he reached Japan, and then spent the rest of his life trying to defeat the British Raj through political and trying to raise money to get guns to give to revolutionaries in India and things like that. He was a lonely gentleman in Tokyo, and the British tracked him down there, and they said to the Japanese government, with whom they had an alliance, we have to arrest this guy and give him back to us, and we'll put him on trial. And for a while the Japanese were able to prevaricate and say no, but then it came to be that his friends, who were the anti-British unit in the Japanese area, the Pan-Asian movement, wanted to get rid of all the colonial powers from Asia. They hid him in a little hut beside a restaurant, a bakery, and no one could find him. And while he was there, he would tell the Japanese lady who ran the restaurant and her husband that he was so lonely he needed to cook for himself, and they would find spices and he would cook these wonderful Bengali curries. And years later he added that curry to the menu of this restaurant, and people said that this is not like Japanese curry, but the Japanese have their own curry, which is based on British curry, which is what they got from their English Royal Navy. So it's not, it's kind of sweet, and it's got raisins in it, and to him, as a proper Bengali cook, it was a travesty, and also represented the worst kind of British colonialism in a culinary way. So to this day, that restaurant, long after all of this is over and done with, is called the Nakamuraya Company, as it was then too, and it's now a huge not a multinational, but they're all over Japan, and they still sell this curry to his original recipe, and in pouches too. They sell hundreds of thousands of these curry pouches a year, and you can go there. And my son and his wife, who's Japanese, went to this restaurant and had this curry, Bose's own curry, that is still cooked and offered there, and it's served in a very un-Japanese way, which is that you put it on top of the rice instead of beside the rice, the way Japanese curry is served, and that sort of symbolizes the fact that it's an Indian curry. And Bose brought his own recipe. He sought out the right kind of chickens, the right kind of onions, the right kind of rice, and culinary-wise, his story is quite sort of clean-cut and direct. Politically, it's not so easy. He became part of the Imperial Japanese movement, ironically, since he was against the Imperial British movement, and he died during World War II.
Wow.
But yeah,
that is just these stories are amazing. And a journalist described the result of the dish as the taste of love and revolution. So
yeah,
how would you describe it?
Well, it is that, because in the middle of the story I just told you, he married the daughter of the couple who owned the restaurant where he was hiding out. And that's why it was the love part gets in there, and the revolution is because of his own past as a freedom fighter. So I was tasked with finding out what a Bengali chicken curry tasted like in the 1880s when he was growing up, and I went to talk to my friend Hemant Bhagwani, who's a restaurateur here in Toronto and in Ottawa too. And he said, "Oh, I have the recipe for you in my pocket." And he'd just been in Bengal doing research into Anglo-Indian British Raj dishes for a restaurant he was planning to open. I don't know if he ever did. He's opened 71 restaurants, but there was the recipe for us, and it all checked out, and it was exactly the way that Bose had tried to recreate in Japan using strange ingredients and whatever. So another coincidence, we lucked into the actual recipe that we could use.
And as far as the dish itself, is it just sort of rich? Is it spicy? Is it?
It's actually a mourgir jol, which means it has a slightly looser, more liquidy sauce than one might expect from a curry like that. So it's got chicken on the bone and potatoes and panch phoran, which is the great Bengali spice mix of 5 different seeds: fenugreek and cumin and nigella and black mustard and I think fennel seed, that's right. So it tastes of all these wonderful spices, and then you can add as much fresh green chilies as you can tolerate, and it can be very hot or not. But it's a simple curry, but it's very, very delicious.
Sounds great. All right, Jan Smetterlin and the cake that reached the Queen Mother. I think we're getting onto the chocolate cake. So the little background here, Jan was a world-class Polish concert pianist, and is known for the Queen Mother's cake, a dense, moist, intensely flavored cake. The texture is closer to something between a flourless chocolate torte and a very fine, dark European confection. It's one of only 2 recipes in the book that won, you say, unanimous approval from all of your family members. What makes it different from every other chocolate cake you've ever had, James?
Well, it's interesting because it's very like many chocolate cakes that we've all had. It's very like a flourless chocolate cake that would be made in Passover in any number of houses all over the world. It's very like one of Elizabeth David's flourless chocolate cakes. It's very like a torta caprese from Capri, but for some reason the way he did it, it's just kind of great, and more chocolatey and more rich and more intense, and there's a good half-inch of very deep chocolate icing on top. And he got the recipe from a Dutch woman in Batavia, Indonesia, when he was doing a concert tour there in the 1930s. And she was part of the Dutch colonial presence there, and she cooked this and served it to him. And he said, "I must have the recipe," because he loved to collect recipes wherever he went in the world. And she gave it to him. And then back in England, he cooked it for a friend of his, another pianist, whose name was Lady Fermoy. She said, "Oh my God, this is something that my friend, the Queen will love." and she was the queen and not yet the queen mother. And so Lady Fermoy cooked this cake for the queen, and she adored it. She asked for a second slice. She said, I can't believe I did that, but she did. And 20 years later, when the Queen Mother, as she then was, invited Jan Smetlin, the pianist, back to her house after he'd given a concert in England, she had this cake served to him and said, I understand this was your recipe originally, Mr. Smetlin. And he was so honoured. And when he was in New York later doing another series of concerts, some journalists got the idea that the Queen Mother was somehow involved, and so he told the story and he cooked the cake for her in the Herald Tribune kitchens. And from then on it became huge. It went viral, as we would say today, in the States. And from that recipe in the paper, and then to cookbooks by other people like Maida Hita, the great dessert maven of American culture. And this cake spread everywhere. And by the sort of after his death in the 1970s, he died in the 1960s, it was basically, you could find it anywhere you went in America. It was a sort of standard default after dinner cake with raspberries thrown at it or whipped cream or something like that. And so it became hugely famous. It fulfilled our mandate that the recipe had to then become embedded in the culture where it landed. It couldn't just be sort of floating around on top. And so to this day, I get offered that cake, and I see it on restaurant menus even, although the name is different. But that's the cake that we cooked that came out so dry the first time. But yeah. We got it right in the end.
That's good. That's great. Good one to finish on. Now, just a few things as we start to wrap up here. The introduction says a great recipe is like a great idea. It has a tendency to proliferate, to wriggle under or over or through obstacles it encounters until it reaches a welcoming home in a new culture. Your subjects were all really well known in their own time, primarily for something other than food, and today their culinary legacies have outlasted everything else they did. You spent your career writing about food. Why is food such a durable carrier of memory, say compared to politics, business, and other endeavors, James?
Well, yeah, I think because, food enters we experience food through all our senses. And its language is not involved, like music. Everybody can taste food and have the same or their own personal reaction to it. You don't have to know the language to read it, if it was a book or whatever. And we know how resonant the memory is of aromas and flavors and things like that. They come unbidden back into the conscience or laden with associations. And I think that food is incredibly powerful, whether it's just for sustenance or whether it's some work of art from a brilliant chef. Food is a huge part of our lives. We encounter it 3 times a day, if not.
Yes, absolutely. Beautiful. The introduction also mentions the term fake lore, which I love, to describe food myths that have been repeated so many times online or elsewhere that they're now treated as fact. You write that the real truth is essentially stranger than fiction. Which of your 8 subjects produced the piece of documented history so improbable that you doubted the primary source until you finally confirmed it?
Well, I guess it was Ben Wenberg, the slave trader.
Okay.
Because if you read about him outside our book, then he's just this jaunty old sea captain who goes into a restaurant and makes a fabulous dish. Right. But in fact, he was this very sinister and wicked man. He helped Boss Tweed escape the law. He was a criminal. And he died a bankrupt, and people at his funeral were astonished to find out that he had a wife and children living in Connecticut, because he'd always passed as a bachelor in New York. So, my wife did this incredible, about a year of forensic research to uncover bit by bit, legal document by legal document, the life of Ben Wenberg, and to finally put it together. And she actually met his great-great-granddaughter.
Really?
And
was she
who
scandalized?
knew nothing about him.
No, really? Oh.
Well, she said, "Oh, that's so funny, because he wasn't really my great-great-grandfather, but his grandson, my grandfather, had an affair with my grandmother." And so I guess there were scoundrels all the way down through this family.
That's great, continuing on the family tradition. So, in the Museum of James Chatto, which 3 objects would be on the central display, James?
Boy, I would start definitely with my most precious possession, which is a pair of lapis lazuli cufflinks that my wife gave me on our 30th wedding anniversary. And
Lovely.
they're almost too precious to wear, but I do wear them because they're beautiful. That would be number one.
Okay.
I'd have to have a puppet because puppets are a big part of my life. And I would choose my oldest puppet, which is a sort of weird brown puppet called Zoltan, and I used to use him to teach my children to count when they were very, very small.
Oh,
So Zoltan would represent the puppet kingdom.
that's
And
great.
then the third thing, I guess maybe a shell or a feather or something that would just stand for all the wonderful serendipitous things that the world has dropped in front of me over the years.
Lovely, 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 lovely. Not to be too morbid, but which wine would you like served at your funeral? Not that we're planning.
I love this question. I have to think long and hard about that, Natalie. But since I'm planning to have pizza at my funeral,
Oh.
I think the one I would choose would be a very dry Alsatian muscat, because it's such a counterintuitive wine. It smells so perfumed and ethereal, and it's bone dry and such a great appetite stimulant. And I think you'd need that to have with your pizza, and it would just make you eat all the hungrier and eat more pizzas. I think that would be my one.
Yes, and remind everyone attending your funeral that you truly were a man of great contradictions. So the wine is
Exactly.
perfectly embodying it. And if you could put up a billboard in downtown Toronto, what would it say?
Well, that's easy. I'd say put away your phone and engage with the world.
And get my book.
Yeah, buy my
Yes.
book.
This is marvelous, marvelous, James. So as we wrap up our conversation, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to mention?
No, I mean, thank you for your wonderful questions, Natalie. I mean,
Absolutely. My
you've
pleasure. It was a great
taken
book.
us through the book. It's great. Thank you.
It's a tremendous book, and yet it's so graceful. It just goes from one section to the next effortlessly. How can people best find you in the book online, James?
My online presence is really on Instagram. So if you go to the James Chatto, I had to add the because there is an Instagram account called James Chatto, and it turns out it's a high school kid in the Philippines,
Right.
and we've never met.
Ah.
But so the James Chatto will find me, and my puppets and my book and our book.
Excellent. And your book, of course, will be available through all of the online retailers, Amazon chapters, all the places we would expect.
Yeah,
Yes.
University of Toronto Press published it, luckily, so
Okay.
it's there in Europe and the States as well.
Sure. Great. Worldwide. That's terrific. These days, everybody can get whatever they want to read. Wonderful. James, this has been a true pleasure. It's great to reconnect with you. Next time, I hope it's in person over a glass or three of Muscat.
That would be lovely.
Muscadet. But don't hang up, but I'll say goodbye for now. And thanks again for sharing your journey and the book. It's marvelous. I highly recommend it.
Thank you, Natalie. So nice to see you.
Okay, cheers. All right. I just